It was a warm, quiet morning in a rich part of the city, the kind of neighborhood where everything looked clean and expensive wide sidewalks, tall trees, and buildings that seemed to whisper instead of speak. The sun touched the tops of polished cars. A few joggers passed by, earbuds in, faces calm. At the corner, a large women's medical clinic stood like a hotel, glass walls, smooth stone, and not a single sound out of place. Everything about it said, only certain people belong here. Danielle stood just outside the main doors. One hand rested gently on her belly 6 months along. Her other hand held the strap of her old tote bag. She looked calm, strong even, but her eyes flicked toward the front door like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Her soft blue maternity dress fit her perfectly. It wasn't expensive, but it was neat, clean, and beautiful against her deep brown skin. She wasn't dressed to impress anyone, just to feel good and stay cool in the spring air. She took a deep breath and whispered quietly to her baby, "All right, little one, let's get this over with. Daddy will be here soon." Her voice was gentle, but her shoulders tensed as she stepped through the automatic doors. Inside, everything felt colder. The air smelled like flowers, but not in a nice way to perfect, to fake. Leather chairs sat along the wall. Magazines were neatly stacked, untouched. A receptionist sat behind the desk, blonde, young, and busy tapping on a keyboard. She glanced up, met Danielle's eyes for half a second, then looked back down like she hadn't seen her at all. Danielle walked slowly to the desk and spoke politely. "Hi, I'm Danielle Carter. I have a 10:30 with Dr. Halbert." Her voice was steady. She smiled the way she had learned to, kind but careful, hoping for a little kindness in return. The receptionist blinked, stared just a little too long, and then finally tapped something on her computer. Double quotes Dr. Halbert, she asked, like the name didn't sound right coming from Danielle. Double quotes yes. Danielle said again, "Scheduled 2 weeks ago. I confirmed last night." A clipboard slid across the counter without eye contact. "Fill this out," the woman said flatly. No smile, no welcome. Danielle sat down in the waiting area. The silence pressed down like a weight. Across from her, two women with designer handbags whispered quietly. One of them looked Danielle up and down, then clutched her bag a little tighter. A man in a suit avoided her eyes completely. She kept her head down and filled out the forms carefully, her handwriting perfect even as her fingers trembled slightly. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself she had been through worse. But this place made it harder to pretend. Danielle was used to spaces like this, places where people didn't say anything mean, but still made her feel small. She had spent years smiling through it. Today, though, something felt different. The quiet judgment in the air didn't roll off her the way it usually did, and she didn't know why, but deep down, she knew this wasn't going to be just another appointment. Danielle's name was finally called, but the nurse didn't smile or say hello. She just stood in the hallway, holding a clipboard, barely looking up. Danielle rose slowly, pressing one hand to the small of her back as she grabbed her bag. She gave a small smile out of habit, but the nurse had already turned and started walking ahead, not waiting. The hallway they entered was spotless. Soft music played, probably meant to be relaxing, but to Danielle, it felt fake. The walls were lined with framed photos of glowing white mothers holding their babies. Danielle glanced at them and quietly wondered why none of them looked like her. They stopped at a door marked 3B. The nurse pushed it open and said, "The doctor will be with you shortly." She closed the door before Danielle could respond. The room smelled like lavender and cleaning spray. Everything inside was neatly arranged. Exam bed, monitor, fresh tissue box. Danielle sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed her dress over her knees. She checked the time. 10:43. Ethan was running late, just by a few minutes, but today, those minutes felt heavier than usual. This was supposed to be their first 4D ultrasound, the one where they get to see the baby's face. She had imagined holding his hand. Now she was alone, trying not to feel hurt. Then the door opened. Dr. Lindsay Halbert walked in wearing a stiff white coat and sharp expression. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She just looked at Danielle, slowly, silently, like she was trying to figure out why she was there at all. "So you're Danielle Carter," she finally said, her voice dry and cold. Danielle straightened her back and nodded. "Yes. Good morning. I believe we're doing the 4D scan today." The doctor didn't move. She looked Danielle up and down, not like a doctor looking at a patient, but like someone judging a stranger in a store. Then she spoke, flatly, "You came alone, Danielle?" Explain, gently. My husband had to handle something at work. He's on his way. The doctor smirked. Of course, she said, under her breath, then turned to shuffle some papers without urgency. Her tone changed suddenly, cutting and cruel. Let me guess you don't know who the father is? Or maybe he just decided today that he's done. With all this, Danielle's breath caught in her chest. Excuse me, she said, unsure if she'd heard correctly, but the doctor turned to her, eyes narrowed. Look, she said, this is not a free clinic. This is for women who actually care about their health. You show up here alone, looking like you stepped off a bus, and expect what exactly? Danielle stood slowly, her fists clenched at her sides. I made this appointment. I confirmed it. I came here respectfully, but Dr. Halbert stepped closer, voice low and sharp. You people are always respectful until there's a problem. Then it's drama, yelling, and lies. Not today. Not in my clinic. Danielle's heart pounded. Her voice trembled, but she held her ground. I'm leaving. I won't be spoken to like this. But the doctor's next words stopped her cold. Oh, you're not leaving just yet, she said, turning toward the counter. Something's missing. She touched her wrist and glanced around. My watch, Cartier, platinum. I left it right here. Then her eyes locked on Danielle, and now it's gone. Danielle froze. The room didn't move, but everything inside her did. Before she could answer, the doctor turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor. The door shut behind her, hard, and just like that, Danielle was no longer a patient. She was a suspect. Danielle stood alone in the small exam room, her heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. 1 minute she was getting ready for an ultrasound. The next she was being accused of stealing. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, as if to protect her child from what was coming. She reached into her bag for her phone to call Ethan, but before she could dial, footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, heavy, the kind that don't rush because they already made up their mind. The door opened. Two security guards stepped in, both white, both tall, both wearing blank expressions like they'd done this too many times to care. One was older, holding a clipboard. The other looked younger, bulky, chewing gum like it was a challenge. Neither of them introduced themselves. No one asked if she was okay. Double quotes Miss Carter, the older one said, voice cold and practiced. Dr. Halbert has reported missing property. She identified you as a person of interest. You'll need to come with us. Danielle's eyes widened. I haven't taken anything, she said, voice shaking. This is a mistake. We'll sort that out downstairs, the younger guard said, already moving closer. You can explain yourself in the security office. I'm pregnant, she said firmly, standing her ground. I don't feel safe being handled like this. I need to call my husband. He's on his way. You'll get your chance, the older man replied, eyes already on the hallway. They didn't touch her, but they didn't give her room either. Danielle followed them quietly, her mind spinning. They didn't walk her through the main area. Instead, they led her down a back hallway past locked doors, staff-only signs, and rooms that didn't look like places for patients. The air changed. It smelled like cleaning supplies and something else, something colder. At the end of the hallway, they stopped in front of a gray metal door. No windows, no label, just a thick handle. The younger one pulled it open. Inside was a small room with a metal desk, plastic chair, and flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like it didn't want to be there either. There were no windows, no warmth, no sign this place had ever been used for anything but holding. People, sit. The younger guard ordered. Danielle looked at the chair. It was bolted to the floor. She sat down carefully, one hand on her stomach. Her voice was soft, but clear. Please, I just want to call my husband. The guard didn't answer. Phone, he said instead. Danielle blinked. What? Hand it over. She hesitated, then slowly reached into her bag and placed her phone on the desk. The younger guard grabbed it, turned it off, and locked it in a drawer. We're holding it until this is resolved. You can't just take, she started. You're not under arrest, the older one interrupted, voice low but final. But you are being detained while we investigate. You'll have to cooperate. Danielle's heart thudded in her chest. She looked around the room. No cameras, no clock, nothing but silence and the guards watching her like she didn't belong. Detained? For what? She asked. Where's the proof I took anything? I didn't even touch the counter. The older guard shook his head. We're not here to argue. We're here to verify. Once that's done, you're free to go. It didn't feel like she was free to do anything. She stared at the wall in front of her, hands trembling over her belly. The baby moved just a little enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to stay calm. But every part of her knew this wasn't just about a watch. It was about her, about how they saw her, about how easily they decided she was the problem. At the front desk upstairs, Ethan Carter stepped through the glass doors like he had done it 1,000 times before. But this time, every step carried a purpose. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't rush. But the look in his eyes was enough to make anyone move. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, clean lines, polished shoes, and a small gold badge pinned to his chest. His presence was calm, but strong, like someone who wasn't here to argue. He was here to fix something. The young receptionist looked up, her usual fake smile fading the second their eyes met. "I'm looking for Danielle Carter," he said, voice low but clear. "She had a 10:30 appointment with Dr. Halbert. I'm her husband." The woman hesitated, fingers frozen over her keyboard. She stammered something about checking, but Ethan didn't move. He didn't blink. "Please do," he said, still polite. But now the air around him felt different, heavy, serious. Finally, she mumbled something about a situation and said security had been notified. Ethan leaned in slightly. "What situation?" he asked, not loud, but sharp enough that she flinched. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then quietly said, "Danielle might be downstairs with security. There was a misunderstanding. I want to see her," Ethan said, steady. "Now." She offered to get the floor manager, but Ethan had already reached into his jacket and pulled out his credentials. He opened the leather case, showing his federal ID, Deputy Director, Office of Civil Rights Enforcement, Department of Justice. Her face went pale. "Where's the security office?" he asked again. "Down the corridor. First door on the left," she whispered. Without saying another word, Ethan turned and walked toward it. His steps echoed through the hallway, not loud, but every footfall carried weight. He didn't run. He didn't panic. But everything in his body said, someone messed up. He reached the gray metal door. It was slightly open. Inside, he could hear voices, low and tense. He pushed it open. Danielle was sitting stiff in the plastic chair, hands resting over her belly, her face pale, but still holding herself together. The guard stood nearby, clearly not expecting company. The younger one straightened, gum still in his mouth. The older one narrowed his eyes. "Can we help you?" the older one asked. Ethan stepped all the way into the room. "Yes, you could start by explaining why my wife is being held here, without a lawyer, without her phone, and without any proof she did anything wrong." His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Everything about the way he said it made the room feel smaller. Danielle looked up, her voice cracking just slightly. "Ethan." He moved to her side, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and turned back to the guards. "I want the name of the person who gave this order. I want to see the report, and I want access to every minute of footage showing her movements in this building, immediately." The room went quiet. Neither guard moved at first. The younger one looked unsure. The older one tried to keep calm. "We were just following procedure," he said. "You're not trained in constitutional law." Ethan replied, voice still level. "I am, and what you've done here breaks more than one." The tension in the air shifted. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. But the way he stood, the way he spoke, it told everyone in the room that something serious had just happened, and the consequences were about to begin. The older officer finally moved, walking over to the wall-mounted monitor with stiff shoulders. His fingers hovered over the buttons like he suddenly wasn't sure what to do. Ethan stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes locked on the screen. Danielle stayed seated, watching quietly, still holding her belly, but now with a little more breath in her chest. For the first time since this started, she wasn't alone. The footage started playing. The camera showed the hallway outside exam room 3B. Timestamp, 10:41 a.m. Danielle walked in, calm and polite. She touched only the door handle and the chair. That was it. Nothing else. She didn't go near the counter, didn't touch the tray where the doctor said the watch had been left. She was just there, waiting, trying to get through her appointment like any other patient. Then, the time rolled forward. At 10:50 a.m., Dr. Halbert exited the room. She paused, looked at the tray, touched her wrist, then walked out quickly with a tight look on her face. Ethan pointed at the screen. Pause it there. Zoom in. The camera zoomed in on the tray. Sitting right next to a box of tissues was the missing watch. Still there. Still untouched. Danielle let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She left it behind. She whispered. The video rolled forward. A cleaning worker entered the room briefly, didn't touch the tray, didn't even notice the watch. Then she left. Still, the watch sat untouched. Then, suddenly, the camera feed cut out. Ethan's face changed. Where's the rest of the footage? The older officer hesitated. That's when the camera rolls over for the afternoon shift. There's a small gap between recordings. A blind spot, Ethan said flatly. Right after the last person walked in and before anyone noticed the watch was missing. How convenient. He stepped back toward the desk and opened the drawer, pulling out Danielle's phone and handed it back to her. Here, he said gently. Then he turned to the officers again. What happened here today is a violation. She was accused without evidence, detained without reason, stripped of her phone and isolated while pregnant. That's not procedure. That's a civil rights issue. And now, you're going to prepare for a full report to the Department of Justice and your facility's licensing. Board. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, no longer chewing his gum. The older one just nodded slowly, knowing there was nothing left to argue. Danielle stood up carefully, her phone pressed to her chest. Her body still ached, her nerves still raw, but something inside her had changed. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She was standing for something bigger. I want to go upstairs, she said quietly. I want to speak to that doctor. Ethan didn't say a word. He just nodded and followed her, and this time, no one stood in their way. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, and for the first time that morning, everyone in the hallway turned to look, not because Danielle had returned, but because of who was walking beside her. Ethan's steps were calm, but firm, each one, sending a clear message. This wasn't over. Danielle walked slightly behind him, no longer nervous, no longer shrinking. Her back was straighter, her chin was lifted. The pain she'd felt earlier hadn't disappeared, but it had hardened into something stronger, something close to purpose. A man in a suit was waiting outside a glass conference room. He looked like he'd been warned already. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, he said, voice shaky. Dr. Halbert is inside. We've gathered the ethics board for immediate review. Ethan gave a small nod. Good, he said. Let's begin. Inside, the room was sharp and clean glass walls, bright lights. A long table that made everything feel cold. 3 board members sat at one end, 2 men and a woman, all of them clearly uncomfortable. Dr. Halbert was seated at the far side, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her jaw was clenched, and though she tried to appear confident, her eyes gave her away. Danielle took the chair across from her. Ethan stayed standing, his federal badge clipped visibly to his suit. Pocket. There was a silence, thick and loaded, before one board member finally spoke. We've seen the security footage, he said slowly, and we understand you intend to file formal action. Ethan placed a small stack of papers on the table. Yes, my wife was falsely accused, detained without reason, denied communication, and insulted in a medical facility while under your care. We have time-stamped footage showing she never touched the property she was blamed for, and we have witness accounts of racial, targeted comments from your staff. Dr. Halbert scoffed. Under her breath, I followed protocol, she said quickly. I had every reason to be cautious. You had every reason to assume, Ethan replied, his voice still calm, but unshakable. Not because of her behavior, not because of the facts, but because of the color of her skin and the fact that she walked in. Alone, Danielle turned her gaze toward the doctor. Her voice was steady, clear. You looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. You didn't see a teacher, or a wife, or a mother. You saw a problem before you even spoke to me. Double quotes Dr. Halbert. Leaned back, defensive. That's not what happened. Danielle didn't flinch. You told me I looked like I came from a bus station, that I probably didn't know who the father of my baby was. You called me a thief before I could even explain why I was alone. The room fell quiet. The board members exchanged glances. One of them shifted awkwardly in his chair. Ethan stepped forward. What happened in that exam room wasn't just unprofessional, it was discriminatory. And we're not walking away with just an apology. We're requesting a written statement, immediate suspension of Dr. Halbert, mandatory anti-bias, training for all staff, and a full public report. The board chair's voice was low and careful. We'll begin proceedings right away." Dr. Halbert stood suddenly, knocking her chair sideways. She stormed out without saying a word. No one stopped her. No one followed. That week, the clinic released a public statement. Dr. Halbert was placed on indefinite leave. New training sessions were announced, but the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, Danielle stood at a podium in front of the same clinic, her husband beside her and local civil rights leaders at her side. Reporters gathered around as she spoke not with anger, but with purpose. "This isn't just about what happened to me," she said. "It's about what happens to women like me every day walk into a room and we're already guilty. Already less. That has to change." The crowd didn't shout. They didn't cheer loudly, but they stood, silently united, and as Danielle looked down at her belly at the life growing inside her, she smiled, because she knew this was bigger than a single appointment. It was the beginning of something stronger.